this to happen so he would be free. He felt a pleasant explosion of happiness inside him and relaxed in the corner of the plush seat. For the last 3 years, really, he had been waiting for this to happen. He could have bought a divorce, of course, but he hadn't ever amassed that much spare money. Starting a career as an architect, without benefit of a job with a firm, had not been easy and still wasn't. Miriam had never asked for an income, but she plagued him in other ways, by talking of him in Metcalf as if they were still on the best of terms, as if he were up in New York only to establish himself and eventually send for her. Occasionally she wrote him for money, small but irritating amounts which he let her have because it would be so easy for her, so natural to her, to start a campaign in Metcalf against him, and his mother was in Metcalf. A tall, blond young man in a rust-brown suit dropped into the empty seat opposite Guy and, smiling with a vague friendliness, slid over into the corner. Guy glanced at his pallid, undersized face. There was a huge pimple in the exact center of his forehead. Guy looked out the window again. The young man opposite him seemed to debate whether to start a conversation or take a nap. His elbow kept sliding along the windowsill, and whenever the stubby lashes came open, the gray, bloodshot eyes were looking at him and the soft smile came back. He might have been slightly drunk. Guy opened his book, but his mind wandered after half a page. He looked up as the row of white fluorescent lights flickered on down the ceiling of the car, let his eyes wander to the unlighted cigar that still gyrated conversationally in a bony hand behind one of the seat backs, and to the monogram that trembled on a thin gold chain across the tie of the young man opposite him. The monogram was C.A.B., and the tie was of green silk, hand-painted with offensively orange-colored palm trees. The long, rust-brown body was sprawled vulnerably now, the head thrown back so that the big pimple or boil on the forehead might have been a topmost point that had erupted. It was an interesting face, though Guy did not know why. It looked neither young nor old, neither intelligent nor entirely stupid. Between the narrow, bulging forehead and the lantern jaw, it scooped degenerately, deep where the mouth lay in a fine line, deepest in the blue hollows that held the small scallops of the lids. The skin was smooth as a girl's, even waxenly clear, as if all its impurities had been drained to feed the pimple's outburst. For a few moments Guy read again. The words made sense to him and began to lift his anxiety. "But what good will Plato do you with Miriam?" an inner voice asked him. It had asked him that in New York, but he had brought the book anyway. An old text from a high school philosophy course, an indulgence to compensate him, perhaps, for having to make the trip to Miriam. He looked out the window and, seeing his own image, straightened his curling collar. Anne was always doing that for him. Suddenly he felt helpless without her. He shifted his position, accidentally touched the outstretched foot of the young man asleep, and watched fascinatedly as the lashes twitched and came open. The bloodshot eyes might have been focused on him all the while through the lids. "Sorry," Guy murmured. "It's all right," the other said. He sat up and shook his head sharply. "Where are we?" "Getting into Texas." The blond young man brought a gold flask from his inside pocket, opened it, and extended it amiably. "No thanks," Guy said. The woman across the aisle, Guy noticed, who had not looked up from her knitting since St. Louis, glanced over just as the flask upended with a metallic splash. "Where are you bound?" The smile was a thin, wet crescent now. "Metcalf," Guy said. "Oh, nice town, Metcalf. Down on business?" He blinked his sore-looking eyes politely. "Yes." "What business?" Guy looked up reluctantly from his book. "Architect." "Oh," with wistful interest. "Build houses and things?" "Yes." "I don't think I've introduced myself." He half stood up. "Bruno, Charles Anthony Bruno."